Why doesn't Joseph have a tribe named after him? Have you ever paused while reading the Bible and wondered about that Joseph was Jacob's most beloved son? He was the one who saved his entire family from starvation and rose to become one of the most powerful men in Egypt. Yet when the Bible lists the 12 tribes of Israel, his name seems to be missing. At first glance, it almost feels unfair. How could someone so central to the story be left out? But the reality is actually the opposite. Joseph was not forgotten at all. In fact, he received a distinction that none of Jacob's other sons ever received. And when you understand what really happened, you begin to see a deeper pattern about how God works in ways that often overturn human expectations. Today, we're going to explore this fascinating biblical mystery that many readers overlook. We'll see why Joseph's name does not appear as one of the tribes of Israel and what that detail reveals about inheritance, prophecy, and God's surprising ways of shaping history. But before we continue, if this kind of content helps you understand the Bible more clearly, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future studies like this. Now, let's begin the story. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, but he was the first son born to Rachel, the woman Jacob loved more than anyone else. Because of that, Joseph held a special place in his father's heart. Genesis chapter 37 tells us that Jacob openly favored Joseph above his other sons, and even gave him a special robe as a sign of that affection. The gift might have seemed harmless, but to Joseph's older brothers, it was a constant reminder that their father preferred him over them. Their resentment slowly grew into deep jealousy. That jealousy eventually reached a breaking point. One day when Joseph came to check on his brothers as they were tending the flocks, they began to plot against him. At first, some of them even considered killing him. Reuben, the eldest brother, stepped in and prevented that from happening. Instead of murdering Joseph, they threw him into a pit. Later, when a group of merchants traveling to Egypt passed by, the brothers decided to sell Joseph as a slave to cover up what they had done. They took Joseph's robe, stained it with animal blood, and brought it back to their father. They told Jacob that a wild animal must have attacked his son. Jacob believed them and was overwhelmed with grief. From a human perspective, Joseph's life had just collapsed, betrayed by his own brothers, and carried away into slavery. His future seemed completely destroyed. But the Bible repeatedly shows that God is able to turn even the darkest circumstances into part of a larger plan. Years later, Joseph himself would say to his brothers in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." That statement perfectly summarizes what unfolds in Joseph's story. When Joseph arrived in Egypt, he was purchased by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Joseph began working in Potiphar's household, and despite being a slave in a foreign land, he prospered. The reason was simple: God was with him. Everything Joseph managed seemed to succeed. And before long, Potiphar trusted him with the entire administration of his house. But Joseph's journey was far from easy. Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of trying to assault her after Joseph refused her advances. Because of that lie, Joseph was thrown into prison. Once again, his life seemed to take a devastating turn. Yet even in prison, Joseph was not abandoned by God. The same favor that had followed him in Potiphar's house continued there. Joseph eventually gained the trust of the prison warden and was placed in charge of the other prisoners. During this time, 2 officials from Pharaoh's court, the cupbearer and the baker, were imprisoned as well. Both men had troubling dreams that they could not understand. Joseph listened to their dreams and explained their meanings with remarkable accuracy, just as Joseph predicted. The cupbearer was restored to his position while the baker was executed. For a moment, it seemed like Joseph's situation might improve quickly, but the cupbearer forgot about him. Joseph remained in prison for 2 more years. Then one night, Pharaoh himself had 2 disturbing dreams that none of his advisors or wise men could interpret. In the first dream, 7 healthy cows were devoured by 7 thin and starving cows. In the second dream, 7 full heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin and withered ones. That was when the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner who had interpreted dreams accurately in the past. Joseph was quickly brought out of prison and presented before the king of Egypt. Standing before Pharaoh, Joseph explained that the dreams carried the same message. Egypt would experience 7 years of extraordinary abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. But Joseph did more than interpret the dreams. He also proposed a plan during the years of abundance. Egypt should store a portion of the harvest so that the nation would have food during the years of famine. Pharaoh recognized the wisdom in Joseph's explanation immediately. He realized that someone with Joseph's insight and discernment was exactly the person needed to carry out the plan. So Pharaoh made a decision that would completely change Joseph's life. He appointed Joseph as governor over all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph was just 30 years old when he rose from prison to become one of the most powerful leaders in the entire empire. Joseph immediately began preparing for the coming crisis. During the 7 years of abundance, he organized massive storehouses throughout the land and carefully gathered grain. When the years of famine finally arrived, Egypt was ready, while surrounding regions suffered severe shortages. Egypt had food stored away. Eventually, the famine spread beyond Egypt and reached the land of Canaan, where Joseph's family still lived. Jacob and his sons began to feel the effects of the crisis and realized they had no choice but to travel to Egypt to buy grain. They had no idea that the man controlling Egypt's food supply was the very brother they had sold into slavery years earlier. Their arrival in Egypt set the stage for one of the most emotional and dramatic reunions in the entire Bible. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately, but they did not recognize him. Over a series of encounters filled with tension, testing, and deep emotion, Joseph gradually revealed his identity. What followed was not revenge, but forgiveness. Joseph embraced the brothers who had betrayed him and reassured them that God had used the entire situation to preserve their family. Soon after, Jacob and the entire household of Israel moved to Egypt and settled in the region of Goshen. For the first time in many years, the family was reunited. And it was there in Egypt that the next crucial part of the story began to unfold, one that would eventually explain why Joseph does not have a tribe named after him. Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of an Egyptian priest, and together they had 2 sons. Their names were Manasseh and Ephraim, and the meaning behind those names reveals how Joseph understood everything that had happened in his life. Manasseh means God has made me forget my suffering, reflecting how Joseph had moved beyond the pain of his past. Ephraim means fruitful, because God had blessed him and allowed him to prosper, even in a foreign land. At this point, it might seem like Joseph's story has already reached its happy ending. But what happens next introduces a surprising twist that will reshape the future of the tribes of Israel. And it all begins with a conversation between an aging Jacob and his beloved son Joseph. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years after being reunited with Joseph. Those years were likely some of the most peaceful of his long and complicated life. The family that had once been divided by jealousy and deception was now together again. But as time passed, Jacob began to sense that his life was nearing its end. Like many patriarchs in the ancient world, he wanted to settle important matters of blessing and inheritance before he died. So Jacob sent for Joseph. What followed is recorded in Genesis chapter 48, and it contains one of the most surprising moments in the entire story of Israel's tribes. When Joseph arrived, he did not come alone. He brought his 2 sons with him, Manasseh and Ephraim. These boys had grown up in Egypt, far from the land of Canaan, where their grandfather had lived most of his life. Jacob looked at the 2 young men standing before him and said something that must have startled Joseph. "Your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in Egypt before I came here, will be counted as my sons. They will be mine, just like Reuben and Simeon." With those words, Jacob did something extraordinary. He formally adopted his grandsons as if they were his own sons. In other words, Ephraim and Manasseh would not simply be descendants of Joseph. They would stand on the same level as the sons of Jacob themselves. At first, this decision might seem confusing. Why would Jacob adopt his grandsons when he already had 12 sons of his own? The answer lies in something extremely important. In the culture of the ancient Near East, the birthright. The birthright was a special privilege given to the firstborn son. It included leadership within the family and, most importantly, a double portion of the inheritance. Instead of receiving a single share like the other sons, the firstborn received 2 portions. Jacob's firstborn son was Reuben. According to tradition, Reuben should have received that double portion automatically, but Reuben made a grave mistake that permanently damaged his standing within the family. Genesis 35:22 records that Reuben slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine. In the cultural and moral context of the time, this act was not only deeply dishonorable, but also seen as a challenge to his father's authority. Because of that sin, Reuben lost his birthright. The Bible later confirms this directly in 1 Chronicles 5:1-2, explaining that although Reuben was the firstborn, the rights of the firstborn were given instead to the sons of Joseph. This is the key to understanding everything. Joseph, though not the eldest, received the double portion that normally belonged to the firstborn. But instead of receiving 2 portions of land personally, that double inheritance would be represented through his 2 sons by adopting Ephraim and Manasseh as his own sons. Jacob effectively elevated them into 2 separate tribes within Israel. Instead of one tribe bearing Joseph's name, there would now be 2 tribes descending from him. Joseph, in a sense, received something greater than a single tribal name. His inheritance was doubled. After declaring the adoption, Jacob prepared to bless the 2 boys. This moment carried enormous symbolic importance. In patriarchal culture, the blessing of the father or grandfather was not merely a kind wish, it was often seen as prophetic, shaping the destiny of future generations. Joseph carefully positioned his sons according to tradition. Manasseh, the older son, was placed at Jacob's right hand, while Ephraim, the younger, stood at his left. This placement mattered because the patriarch's right hand was reserved for the firstborn, who would receive the greater blessing. But then something unexpected happened. As Jacob stretched out his hands, he deliberately crossed them. Instead of placing his right hand on Manasseh, the older son, he placed it on Ephraim, the younger. His left hand rested on Manasseh's head. Joseph immediately noticed what had happened. At first, he assumed his father had simply made a mistake. After all, Jacob was old, and his eyesight had grown weak. Joseph gently tried to correct him, guiding his father's hand toward Manasseh. "No, my father," Joseph said. "This one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But Jacob refused to change his hands. "I know, my son, I know," Jacob replied firmly. "Manasseh will also become a people, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." This moment, recorded in Genesis 48:14-19, was not a mistake. It was intentional. Jacob understood exactly what he was doing. The crossing of his hands symbolized a prophetic reversal. This pattern appears again and again throughout the Bible. God repeatedly chooses the younger, the unexpected, or the overlooked instead of following human systems of status and hierarchy. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh fits perfectly into that pattern, just as Isaac was chosen over Ishmael and Jacob over Esau. Now Ephraim would receive the greater blessing over his older brother Manasseh. At that moment, Joseph may not have fully understood how those words would unfold in history, but the future of Israel would eventually prove that Jacob's prophecy was remarkably accurate. When the Israelites later settled in the Promised Land, the tribe of Ephraim became one of the most powerful and influential tribes in the nation. Its territory was strategically located in the central region of the land, giving it both political and military importance. In fact, Ephraim's influence grew so strong that its name eventually became a kind of shorthand for the entire northern kingdom of Israel. One of the most significant political developments in Israel's history involved a man named Jeroboam. According to 1 Kings 11:26, Jeroboam was from the tribe of Ephraim. After the death of King Solomon, Jeroboam led the northern tribes in rebellion against the rule of Solomon's son, Rehoboam. This rebellion resulted in the division of Israel into two separate kingdoms. The southern kingdom, centered in Jerusalem, was known as Judah. The northern kingdom, composed of the remaining tribes, often came to be called Ephraim because of the tribe's dominance. Even the prophets adopted this language. When prophets like Hosea spoke about the northern kingdom, they frequently referred to the entire nation simply as Ephraim. Manasseh also became a large and important tribe, but Jacob's prophecy still proved true. Ephraim consistently held a position of greater influence. What began as a simple act of crossing hands during a blessing turned out to shape centuries of Israel's history. But this raises an interesting question. If Ephraim and Manasseh are now counted as two tribes, and Joseph was originally one of Jacob's 12 sons, wouldn't that create 13 tribes instead of 12 at first glance? The numbers seem confusing, yet the Bible maintains the symbolic number of 12 tribes throughout its narrative. So how does that work? The answer lies in the unique role of another tribe, the tribe of Levi. And understanding the role of Levi is the final piece that explains why Joseph himself does not appear on the traditional list of tribal territories. To understand how the number of 12 tribes remained intact, even after Ephraim and Manasseh were counted separately, we need to look at the unique role of the tribe of Levi. Among Jacob's sons, Levi and his descendants were given a very different responsibility from the others. According to Numbers chapter 3, the tribe of Levi was set apart for sacred service, instead of receiving land like the other tribes. The Levites were chosen to care for the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary where Israel worshiped God during their journey through the wilderness. Later, when Israel settled in the Promised Land and the temple was built in Jerusalem, the Levites continued to serve as priests and temple assistants because of this special calling. The Levites did not receive a territorial inheritance the way the other tribes did. Their role was spiritual rather than territorial. Deuteronomy 18:2 summarizes it clearly. They shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The Lord is their inheritance. Rather than receiving one large region of land, the Levites were given specific cities scattered throughout the territories of the other tribes. These cities allowed them to live among the people while carrying out their priestly duties, teaching the law, and overseeing worship. Once you understand that, the structure of the 12 tribes becomes clearer. When the land of Canaan was divided among the tribes, Levi was not included as a territorial tribe. Instead, Joseph's inheritance was represented through his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So when the list of tribes receiving land is recorded, it looks like this: Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. That makes 12 territorial tribes. Levi served as the priestly tribe, and Joseph's legacy lived on through his 2 sons. In other words, Joseph was not excluded. His presence was simply expressed in a different way. Rather than one tribe carrying his name, 2 tribes carried his inheritance in terms of influence and territory. Joseph's legacy was actually larger than that of his brothers. When you step back and look at the entire story, another fascinating pattern becomes visible, one that appears repeatedly throughout Scripture. God often chooses what seems unexpected from a human perspective. In many ancient cultures, the firstborn son held unquestioned priority. Yet throughout the Bible, God frequently overturns that expectation. Abel is chosen over Cain. Isaac is chosen over Ishmael. Jacob is chosen over Esau. Joseph rises above his older brothers. Ephraim receives the greater blessing over Manasseh. Later, David, the youngest among his brothers, is chosen to become king. These examples are not random. They reveal something about the nature of God's purposes. Human systems tend to prioritize power, seniority, and status. But God's choices often follow a different logic, one based on grace, calling, and divine purpose rather than human hierarchy. Joseph's life is one of the clearest demonstrations of that principle. If you trace the events of his life step by step, it almost reads like a series of setbacks. First, he is betrayed by his brothers. Then he is sold into slavery. Later, he is falsely accused and thrown into prison. At each stage, it seems like his story is moving further away from any possible fulfillment. Yet each painful event becomes part of the path that ultimately places Joseph exactly where he needs to be. If he had not been sold into slavery, he would never have gone to Egypt. If he had not been imprisoned, he would never have interpreted the dreams that brought him before Pharaoh. And if he had not risen to power in Egypt, he would not have been able to preserve his family during the famine. The betrayal that nearly destroyed him became the very event that positioned him to save others. This is why Joseph's words to his brothers in Genesis 50:20 carry such profound meaning. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Joseph understood that the story of his life was not defined by human betrayal, but by God's larger plan. Even the details surrounding his sons reflect this theme of transformation. Manasseh's name represents the healing of Joseph's past pain. Ephraim's name reflects the fruitfulness that followed suffering. These names were not chosen randomly. They captured the journey Joseph had walked through. And then Jacob's adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh elevated those two boys who were born in a foreign land and had an Egyptian mother to the same status as the sons of Israel themselves. What could have been seen as a disadvantage instead became a place of honor. When Jacob crossed his hands to bless Ephraim over Manasseh, he was not just performing a symbolic gesture, he was speaking a prophetic word that would shape generations. And history eventually confirmed the accuracy of that blessing. The tribe of Ephraim rose to enormous prominence. Its territory included some of the most important regions of Israel. Political leadership frequently came from this tribe, and its influence became so strong that the name Ephraim was sometimes used to represent the entire northern kingdom. Manasseh also grew into a large and significant tribe, with territory on both sides of the Jordan River. Yet, just as Jacob predicted, Ephraim held the greater prominence. All of these developments trace back to that moment in Genesis 48, when Jacob adopted his grandsons and spoke blessings over them. So when people ask why there is no tribe named after Joseph, the real answer is surprisingly beautiful. Joseph did not receive less, he received more. His inheritance was doubled. Instead of one tribe, two tribes carried forward his legacy. Through Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's influence spread across two territories and two tribal histories within Israel. His name may not appear directly in the list of territorial tribes, but his presence is felt more broadly than that of many others. The son who was once sold into slavery ultimately became the ancestor of two tribes within God's covenant people. If we take a moment to summarize everything we've seen, the mystery becomes much clearer. Joseph does not appear as a tribal name because his inheritance was expressed through his two sons. The birthright that once belonged to Reuben was transferred to Joseph because of Reuben's sin. Jacob then formally adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, raising them to the same status as his own sons. When blessing them, Jacob crossed his hands and gave the greater blessing to Ephraim, the younger. That decision later proved prophetic, as Ephraim became one of the most influential tribes in Israel. The total number of tribes remained 12, because Levi was set apart for priestly service and did not receive a territorial inheritance. As a result, Joseph's legacy was represented through two tribes, while Levi served in a unique spiritual role. And in the end, Joseph's story stands as one of the most powerful testimonies in the Bible about redemption, forgiveness, and the surprising ways God works through human history. The young man who was betrayed by his brothers became the man who preserved their lives. The slave who was imprisoned rose to become a ruler. And the son who seems absent from the list of tribes actually received a double legacy that continued for generations. If this story helped you see the Bible in a new way, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future videos like this. And in the comments, share what part of Joseph's story surprised you the most. Was it Jacob adopting his grandsons, the crossing of the blessing, or the idea that Joseph's inheritance was actually doubled? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.